There's a version of humanity where your grandmother is born in zero gravity, drinks her coffee through a straw, and considers Earth a quaint old retirement village with unpredictable weather. Welcome to What If Horizons, the podcast that drifts curiously through alternate realities with just enough oxygen to keep the absurd alive. I'm your solo narrator, your cosmic co-pilot, and today, we're boldly going where no knees have gone unbuckled before. Imagine a world, or rather, a civilization, that never stopped at the edge of the atmosphere. A version of Homo sapiens that didn't just visit space, but gradually evolved to thrive there. I'm talking bone structures reconfigured for microgravity, eyes adapted to constant darkness and sudden solar flares, lungs that can metabolize in tight recycled environments, and society that treats Earthborn the way city folks treat people who still churn their own butter. It's tempting to imagine that this space-hardy version of us wears shiny suits and zips around in Tesla-branded saucers. But let's not start with the sci-fi cliches just yet. If we're truly talking evolution, not engineering, not space tourism, but genuine biological adaptation over generations, then things get a lot weirder, slower, and far more hilarious. For starters, gravity, or the lack thereof. You may have noticed that humans, in their current state, are not exactly optimized for floating around like glorified jellyfish. Take your average gym rat and place him in orbit for a month, and suddenly he's a spaghetti noodle with biceps made of wishes. Over time, however, if natural selection were allowed to do its work in low gravity, we'd evolve traits that are better suited to orbital life. Long limbs, maybe even stretchy fingers for pulling ourselves around more efficiently, possibly a more flexible spine, or, why not, an entirely new way to stabilize ourselves that doesn't rely on feet at all. You might say, but wouldn't we lose muscle? Yes. In fact, it's entirely possible that future space-adapted humans might be built like interstellar noodles, all brains and tendons, with the kind of physique that could only win a bodybuilding contest in a haunted Victorian painting. But that's fine, because when you live in a habitat where falling is just another word for floating at a weird angle, muscle isn't king anymore. It's all about maneuverability, energy efficiency, and, weirdly enough, not throwing up during spin-based artificial gravity sessions. Speaking of which, the inner ear is not ready for this future. Have you ever tried to walk in a spinning amusement park ride? Now imagine that's your living room. The future human would need to either completely overhaul their balance system or just collectively accept that everyone's going to be slightly nauseous forever. Space barf is the new normal. Then there's radiation. Earth has a lovely magnetic field that protects us from the full fury of the cosmos. Space, not so much. So our future selves might evolve skin that's more resistant to radiation, possibly darker and thicker. Melanin would become fashionably abundant. Or perhaps we'd develop an internal biological shield, a protein that binds to radioactive particles and flushes them out like a cosmic detox smoothie. It's the wellness industry of the year 4500. And what about babies? You think childbirth is complicated now? Try doing it in orbit, where pushing results in the mother floating one way and the baby the other. If humans were to truly evolve for space, reproduction itself might need an overhaul. Maybe gestation moves partially outside the body. Maybe the womb evolves internal suction cups. Maybe future OBGYNs are part-time astronauts. Maybe, and I'm just spitballing here, space babies grow up in semi-liquid cocoons that simulate gravity until their bodies are ready. Like amphibians, but with better Wi-Fi. The real comedy kicks in when you think about daily life. Personal hygiene, for example. No showers in microgravity. You want to wash your hair? Better learn how to wrestle with a floating blob of shampoo while trying not to inhale it. In our space-evolved scenario, humans might grow less hair altogether, or develop oil glands that work differently. Or perhaps they just embrace being a little funky all the time. Space funk, the cologne of the cosmos. Clothing would change too. Forget fashion. Buttons and zippers are impractical when your pants won't stay up. Future garments might cling magnetically to specific points on the body or be embedded with temperature-regulating fabrics that adjust automatically based on your mood or orbit. And footwear? Say goodbye to shoes. Say hello to toe hooks, suction soles, and possibly webbed feet for better stabilization against surfaces. And while we're redesigning humans, can we talk about food? You know how hard it is to eat a taco in 0G? Your precious ground beef becomes a cloud of meat confetti. A society truly evolved for space would need to rethink cuisine altogether. Meals might be grown internally in symbiotic gut farms. Imagine a population that synthesizes its own nutrition, less eating, more digesting via skin patches or ingestible capsules, like a vitamin smoothie, but with more existential implications. We haven't even gotten to the psychological part yet. Living in a confined, artificial environment surrounded by vacuum for generations will not just change our bodies, it'll mess with our minds. Evolution might select for people who are naturally more cooperative, more even-tempered. The drama queen gene? Bred out entirely. Either you become emotionally stable enough to handle space monotony, or you quietly snap and start talking to the airlock. But if cooperation wins, then maybe we get a society that actually functions. No more road rage. No more Karen at the front desk screaming about her missing space latte. A calm, deliberate species, living with purpose, powered by algae and collective playlists. Now before you start imagining floating communes of hairless peace monks playing zero-G chess and writing space poetry on recycled parchment, let's remember, this is only the beginning. We've just started to imagine what an evolved human, truly made for space, might look like. There's more to uncover, like politics, religion, economics, and of course, what happens when two space-evolved societies finally meet and realize they disagree about which direction is down. And we'll get there. But for now, take a moment to look up at the stars tonight and ask yourself, what if we didn't just reach for space, but let it change us forever? So let's say it's been a few hundred generations. Humans, or rather the descendants of Earthlings formerly known as humans, are no longer just visiting space. They're born there, shaped by it, breathing its recycled air and dreaming its vacuum dreams. Their bones have thinned, their eyes have widened, and their sense of direction has become so abstract they no longer understand what upstairs even means. There is no upstairs. There's only forward, backward, and hope your magnetic boots are working. Society, as always, adapts. But without gravity to anchor us, literally and metaphorically, everything from family structures to legal systems gets weird. Let's start with homes. Space habitats are not cozy suburban ranch houses with white picket fences. They are modular, rotating cans filled with carefully balanced ecosystems and the ever-present threat of explosive decompression. Privacy? A curtain and the hope that your neighbor's earbuds are working. Real estate agents of the future don't sell houses. They lease pressurized tubes with shared oxygen privileges. Now, education. You think learning algebra was tough on Earth? Try teaching kids how to write when every pencil stroke sends them into an unintentional pirouette. In our evolved future, traditional classrooms are obsolete. Kids learn through neural uploads, AI tutors, and trial by orbit. Want to understand physics? You'll be spun in a centrifuge until Newton makes sense. Want to study history? Float through a holographic reenactment of the moon landing, complete with conspiracy theorists waving signs in the background. And what about art? Surely humans won't stop creating just because there's no gravity. On the contrary, space art might be the most magnificent form yet. Sculptures made from floating liquid, operas sung in pressure-controlled theaters, graffiti etched onto solar panels orbiting Saturn. And of course, dance, performed not with feet, but with full-body tumbles that defy choreography and occasionally result in bruised egos and dented helmets. Religion, too, must evolve. In space, proximity to the heavens becomes literal, not metaphorical. Some faiths might flourish, others might fracture. New ones will emerge, cults worshipping the black hole as divine void, or orders of monks who orbit in silence, contemplating entropy. The idea of an omnipresent deity takes on new meaning when you live in a habitat where a single mistake can indeed end all existence. Heaven is now a sealed chamber with functioning filtration. Now let's talk politics. Democracy in space? Try organizing a debate when your senator is 2.5 million kilometers away and only communicates via 3-second delayed video. Power structures would need to decentralize. Each space habitat becomes a semi-autonomous entity, forming a loosely connected confederation of floating democracies, unless, of course, the AI that manages life support decides it's tired of humans debating oxygen quotas and stages a silent coup. And speaking of AI, let's be honest, By the time humans have truly evolved to live in space, we're not calling all the shots anymore. A superintelligent system is likely running the plumbing, growing the food, monitoring mental health, and probably judging our taste in ambient space jazz. Humans have evolved physically, yes, but we've also offloaded many decisions to the very tools we once feared would replace us. Irony: thy name is HAL 9000 with a therapy license. Money, in this brave new floating world, becomes laughably outdated. No one's hoarding gold when the real currency is air, water, and bandwidth. Imagine a society where you don't buy a sandwich. You barter 10 minutes of algae farming labor for a protein paste burrito. Inflation is measured not in dollars, but in microbe counts. Investment portfolios include shares in asteroid mining operations and the number of successful oxygen filter regenerations. Financial news sounds like sci-fi horror. Stock prices down due to solar flare. Everyone on Europa panicked and drifted into debt. Let's not forget crime. Yes, humans will still be humans, even in orbit. But space crime comes with much higher stakes. There's no stealing someone's car, just their pressurized suit. No spray painting a wall, just disabling a critical sensor and risking community-wide suffocation. As a result, justice systems become swift, efficient, and very, very polite. After all, if you eject a criminal into space, there's no appeal, just the sound of nothing forever. Yet even in this highly regulated, highly pressurized world, romance blooms. Courtship in zero-G is an elegant dance of magnetized socks and whispered calms. There are no long walks on the beach, but plenty of long drifts through observation domes, watching Earthrise or counting stars like ancient sailors once counted waves. Breakups are messier, sometimes literally, if someone throws a pouch of rehydrated curry in anger. What's wild is how normal all this would become. Spaceborne humans wouldn't think twice about their spindly limbs, translucent skin, or the way their pupils dilate in ultraviolet bursts. They'd scoff at our Earth-centric problems. You had wars over land? We barely know what land is. You argued about gravity? We consider that an optional setting. This is what evolution does. It normalizes the unimaginable. What seems absurd today becomes survival tomorrow. But of course, not everything would be smooth. With evolution comes mutation. With mutation, variability. And with variability, the occasional person who still longs for something they've never touched. The feel of real rain, the scent of pine, the weight of standing on soil and not fearing a breach in the hull when you sneeze too hard. Some would rebel. Some would return. Others would romanticize Earth as a lost paradise. But most would look forward, because that's where the stars are. The space-evolved human is no longer defined by what they left behind, but by what they can become. And that, my fellow speculative sapiens, is both beautiful and deeply terrifying. So take another breath. Enjoy that gravity pressing you into your chair. And remember, we've got many light years left to explore. As generations unfold aboard orbital habitats, moons, or spinning cylinders tethered to asteroids, space evolution doesn't just affect bodies and minds. It reshapes how people understand themselves. Earth is no longer a place, but a concept. A birthplace they've never touched, a blue marble from history books and parental nostalgia. And with this emotional detachment comes a strange new cultural identity. Homo australis, the human of the stars. Their history classes begin not with Mesopotamia, but with the launch of Sputnik. Not with Columbus, but with the first Martian colony. Earth becomes mythologized, romanticized, sometimes demonized. The fall of Earth-based civilization, be it climate collapse, endless wars, or just the inability to agree on metric versus imperial, serves as cautionary tale. You don't want to repeat the mistakes of the grounders, as they're now lovingly or mockingly called. Languages change too. With time and distance, dialects fracture. Maybe English morphs into Spaceglish, a staccato blend of tech jargon, abbreviations, and universal gestures. Picture two people floating in a corridor saying things like Oxy low, ETA loop 6. Sync comms, then doc. Shakespeare would cry, but let's be honest, he probably would have loved space dramas. Even humor evolves. You can't tell a knock-knock joke when doors don't knock. They hiss open. Slapstick is dangerous when someone slipping on a protein pouch could dent the oxygen lines. Pranks revolve around hiding someone's magnetic boots or sending fake alerts about solar storms. If you think Earth memes are chaotic, wait until you see a viral dance trend performed entirely in zero-G with ambient space whale noises. Religion and spirituality continue to mutate. Imagine a sect that believes souls ascend not to heaven but toward the galactic center, or a philosophy that preaches entropy as divine law. Everything breaks down, even your sanity, so enjoy it while it lasts. And who knows, maybe worship of the sun returns, this time with more scientific justification. After all, it's still the one celestial body keeping your solar farm running and your microwave burrito hot. But let's shift gears. Let's talk about nature, or the absence of it. Without Earth's lush ecosystems, humans become amateur gods, terraforming their own environments. Aboard large stations, they build artificial forests where ferns wave gently in circulating air and robotic bees perform programmed pollination routines. Kids chase holographic butterflies that don't exist and feed algae tanks that do. Cows, gone. Meat is printed. Dogs, rare, genetically modified to float and not pee in all directions. Over time, new forms of life emerge. Space-native species, genetically engineered to clean filters, digest waste, or just keep people company. Bioluminescent jelly blobs that pulse with mood colors. Photosynthetic moss pets that purr when exposed to sunlight. You think you're special because your Earth cat can sit on a windowsill? Wait till your neighbor's space frog writes poetry with chromatophores. But the crown jewel of this evolutionary journey isn't biology. It's psychology. Because to live in space long-term, you have to stop fearing it. The void, the silence, the fragility, it becomes background noise. Spaceborne humans develop mental resiliency that would make a Buddhist monk feel insecure. Anxiety over pressure leaks? That's Tuesday. Existential dread about the meaning of life? There's a therapy module for that, probably with soothing nebula visuals and a gentle voice saying, "You are dust and starlight." Also, hydrate. Society begins to drift into entirely new philosophical territory. What does freedom mean when you're always confined to a metal shell? What is community when everyone lives in your air bubble? Privacy becomes a tradable commodity. Silence, a luxury. And the idea of ownership shifts from physical space to mental bandwidth. People brag not about square footage, but about how many minutes they can go without speaking to anyone. Conflict, though reduced, doesn't vanish. Maybe war becomes digital, fought over data packets, bandwidth rights, and intellectual property. Or maybe it returns to its primal roots, competing over resources like water mined from icy moons or heat from unstable reactors. Space war is less about bombs and more about sabotage, cutting off someone's comms, hacking their food printers, disabling their spin gravity mid-toast. Passive aggression, weaponized at light speed. Of course, evolution isn't perfect. It comes with costs. Muscles atrophy, bones hollow. Some spaceborne humans might never walk on a planet again. Their bodies simply can't handle it. Earth becomes an exotic destination, like a luxury vacation planet with overwhelming gravity, confusing wildlife, and too much weather. Imagine taking a shuttle down to Earth, stepping out, and immediately needing a wheelchair, sunscreen, and therapy. Yet there's beauty in this transformation. In adapting to space, humans become something else, not better, not worse, but undeniably new. Culture shifts. Identity blurs. Some might look at a space-evolved human and say, "That's not us anymore." But that's the point. Evolution is not about staying the same. It's about becoming what the universe demands. And still, in this great experiment, echoes of Earth remain. In lullabies sung to babies in airlocked nurseries. In wedding vows exchanged over shared oxygen masks. In the faint taste of tomatoes grown hydroponically with seeds smuggled from Tuscany. Even as humans transcend their birthplace, they carry its memory in their DNA and their jokes. Like that old one. How do you know someone's from Earth? Don't worry, they'll tell you. So buckle in, because we're not done yet. The stars may be the new cradle, but evolution doesn't sleep. Not in space. Not anywhere. As generations pass and microgravity becomes the ancestral homeland of entire lineages, something peculiar happens. Space humans begin to look, well, a little different. Not in the sci-fi horror way with tentacles or glow-in-the-dark pupils, though let's not rule out fashion statements, but in more subtle, cumulative ways. Limbs elongate, torsos stretch, next swan upward. In a place where gravity isn't tugging your bones downward like a passive-aggressive personal trainer, your skeleton becomes a bit more expressive. Think ballet dancer meets balloon animal, but elegant. Mostly, heads grow slightly larger to house ever-adapting brains constantly calculating trajectories, analyzing radiation levels, and, of course, composing sarcastic tweets in 3 languages. Hair thins. Less need for insulation when you're in climate-controlled life tubes. Eyes widen to absorb more light. Noses shrink due to the filtered air. Earth humans might one day look at their space cousins and whisper, "Are they aliens?" To which the spaceborne will casually reply, "Only on your planet." Now let's talk romance. Mating rituals adapt in strange new ways. Courtship might involve a synchronized EVA suit dance, or reciting your family's orbital coordinates like a love poem. Maybe instead of bringing flowers, you offer someone your emergency oxygen tank. Because nothing says, "I love you" like, "Here, have 15 minutes of life support." Marriages take place in zero-G chambers, where rings float between fingers, and the officiant has to tether themselves to the wall lest the vows get interrupted by someone doing an accidental somersault. Raising kids? Welcome to the floating nightmare joy of parenting in space. Baby-proofing in orbital habitat involves magnetic socks, food paste that doesn't escape the spoon, and lullabies sung through intercoms. Imagine explaining gravity to a toddler who has never been pulled down by anything except disappointment. No, sweetie, juice doesn't fall. It just sort of wanders. Education becomes a delicate art form. History teachers must frame Earth events not as distant tales, but as ancestral dramas. The Cold War? That weird fight over political temperature. World War II? A precursor to why we now all live in rotating cans. And math? It becomes essential, not abstract. If your escape pod accelerates at 1.2 gs and your docking target is spinning at 30 RPM, how long before your breakfast returns to haunt you? Religion and spirituality don't vanish. They evolve too. Some groups believe space is sacred because it is untouched by human corruption. Others form cults around black holes, those celestial divas that suck in light and still manage to be fabulous. There's even a rising movement that worships entropy. Their sacred chant is, "It is what it is." Their symbol is a slowly corroding bolt. And speaking of bolts, let's look at engineering. In space, you don't build monuments for the view. You build because your survival depends on it. Architecture becomes more like biosculpture. Habitats grow like coral, modular and self-repairing. Materials are synthesized from recycled waste, asteroids, or the occasional meteorite someone claimed and named Kevin. Fashion adapts as well. Out go the stilettos and denim jeans. In come thermal suits with personality. Think form-fitting, utility-laced outfits that monitor vitals, stream music, and display mood colors like a social media status update. Angry? You're flashing red. In love? Soft pink pulses. Hangry? Chartreuse. Always chartreuse. Helmets become statement pieces. You don't just protect your head. You accessorize your aura. Space cuisine deserves a Michelin star for sheer creativity. Meals are rehydrated masterpieces. A single bite might involve lab-grown salmon, hydroponic lettuce, and a touch of wasabi from a squeezed tube. Chefs become chemists. Dinner becomes a physics experiment. And if someone drops a spoon, you get a majestic ballet of slow-motion panic and floating utensils. Now, commerce. Space economies pivot around the precious triangle of air, water, and attention. Forget gold and Bitcoin. The real currency is time in the VR escape suite or the right to use the fresh fruit printer for an extra minute. Influencers in space are less about selfies and more about how many oxygen hacks they know. Hey guys, today I'm showing you how to stretch your scrubber filters to last 20% longer. Smash that follow button or suffocate. Politics continues, of course. Even when humanity lives in floating communes and rotates in unison, someone will still argue over trash sorting algorithms or noise ordinances in the hydroponics bay. Governments become hyperlocal. Leadership rotates, literally. Your leader might change depending on where your module happens to be in orbit. International relations become intermodule negotiations. It's like the United Nations, if everyone wore jumpsuits and passive-aggressively hoarded Tang packets. And then there's art. Artists find new mediums. Vacuum sculpture, radiation-reactive paint, sonic installations designed for low-pressure acoustics. Poetry is written not just for ears, but for vibrating walls. Theater is performed via hologram with latency delays turned into plot devices. Critics? Still insufferable, even in space. His zero-G interpretive dance lacked gravitas. Literally. Yet, amid all this high-tech reinvention, some things stay beautifully, stubbornly human. People still fall in love. They still argue over whose turn it is to clean the algae tank. They get bored. They daydream. They laugh at farts. Because some universal truths simply transcend dimensions. Living in space becomes less about the technology and more about the culture. The shared rituals of adapting to the void. The quiet camaraderie of knowing you're all just soft, squishy creatures floating in a hostile abyss, pretending this is normal. And if you're wondering whether any of this could happen in our lifetime, consider this. Humans already sleep strapped to walls, eat food from tubes, and argue with strangers across vast distances using glowing rectangles. Maybe we're halfway to space life already. But as humans flourish among the stars, a strange question begins to flicker in the minds of the spaceborne. What is Earth, really? Is it home or myth? A place of origin or a nostalgic bedtime story? For many, it becomes both. Children grow up watching documentaries about animals they've never seen in the flesh. Behold, the cow. The narrator whispers reverently as wide-eyed kids stare at a floating screen showing a four-legged milk-producing creature that, to them, seems just as fictional as a unicorn or a credit card with no fees. Earth becomes sacred and suspicious in equal measure. For the elderly who remember the touch of grass and the sound of unfiltered rain, Earth is heaven lost. For younger generations, it's a contaminated marble ruled by gravity, bugs, and bad decisions. Some treat it like the ancestral temple of human stupidity. Look what we did to paradise. Others fantasize about pilgrimage missions to finally feel a breeze that's not machine-regulated. These tensions eventually fracture the identity of humanity into two tribes, the Terrans and the Spacers. The Terrans romanticize roots and soil, demanding that all humans should return to fix Earth and restore balance. The Spacers? They have no time for mud. They see the stars as destiny, Earth as a tomb. Naturally, the arguments escalate into memes. The Terrans post tree-hugging GIFs. The Spacers respond with zero-gravity acrobatics and sarcastic hashtags like #GravityIsOppression. Yet, just as they begin to grow apart, a problem arises that neither side can ignore: entropy. You see, even in space, where everything is modular, monitored, and designed by people who once got straight as in calculus, things still fall apart. Filters clog, metals degrade, humans age. And so the dream of space permanence faces its first existential wobble. Colonies begin to suffer mysterious failures. A life support glitch in one habitat triggers a panic that spreads across the orbital network faster than gossip at a family reunion. Suddenly, everyone remembers that while escaping Earth was impressive, replacing it entirely might have been a tad premature. Emergency conferences are called. Experts debate solutions using more acronyms than necessary. EVA suits become the new business casual as every government module tries to look responsible. And somewhere in the midst of the chaos, a radical proposal is made. Maybe, just maybe, it's time to reconcile with Earth. Enter the Great Reconnection Project. It begins with diplomatic missions. Earth envoys floating into orbit like awkward exes at a wedding. Apologies are exchanged, air filters are shared, and hugs are attempted with varying success in zero gravity. Eventually, a plan is born, a joint initiative to terraform ruined portions of Earth and reinforce the failing orbital habitats. It's ambitious, idealistic, and wildly over budget within the first 10 minutes. In other words, peak humanity. But it works. Slowly, clumsily, like a toddler learning to walk in moon boots. The Spacers send down engineers with bone reinforcement suits. The Terrans send up soil samples and bacteria cultures designed to revitalize hydroponic systems. There are accidents, sure. A supply pod misfires and ends up crashing into the Louvre. But hey, that's what digital backups are for. In the process, something beautiful happens. Cultural cross-pollination. The Spacers introduce kinetic opera, where songs are performed through floating choreography and laser harmonics. The Terrans bring back ancient rituals, fire dances, communal meals, the inexplicable joy of hitting things with sticks to make music. These traditions merge in unexpected ways. Before long, you have zero-G drum circles and bonfires projected via hologram, complete with simulated smoke you can waft through just for the vibes. Even language evolves. New dialects emerge, half Earth slang, half orbital code. Phrases like "hold your orbit," replace "stay calm." "Go full vacuum" becomes a euphemism for losing it. And "don't vent your suit" is the new "don't lose your cool." Emojis mutate accordingly. But peace is fragile, especially when humans are involved. Tensions flare over resources. Earth wants more satellite bandwidth. Orbitals demand more water from below. Someone hacks a communication relay and sends out a distress signal in the voice of an extinct whale, confusing the entire planetary defense system for 3 days. And yet, through all the chaos, something deeper solidifies: a collective identity. Not Earthlings, not Martians, not Module 6 citizens or Cloud Belt miners. Just humans. Messy, inventive, squabbling mammals who refuse to stay put, but can't quite manage to stay apart either. With time, Earth becomes not the center of human life, but its cultural heartbeat. A place you go not because you have to, but because you want to remember where it all began. Like visiting your childhood home, only with fewer termites and more drones. Children born in orbit now grow up with stories of Earth that aren't just dusty myths, but shared dreams. They learn to bake bread in microgravity. They know what it feels like to watch a sunrise curve around the planet like a whispered secret. They believe that the stars aren't just escape routes, but neighbors waiting to be introduced. And all this brings us to the final frontier, consciousness itself. As humans begin to truly master space living, they start pondering new questions. What does it mean to be human when the environment that shaped you is no longer yours? Can someone raised among artificial gravity and filtered starlight understand love, grief, or beauty the same way as someone grounded in mud and sunlight? The answer, perhaps, is that they don't have to be the same. The future doesn't demand uniformity, it thrives on difference, on improvisation, on jazz solos played through oxygen tubes while someone floats upside down and sketches constellations in foggy window panes. Humans evolved to adapt, to survive deserts, ice ages, betrayal, poetry, and politics. Space is just the next bizarre test. And if we've learned anything, it's that humanity's greatest superpower isn't fire or flight or fossil fuels. It's the absurd, relentless optimism that somewhere out there, even in the void, we can make a home. Preferably one with decent Wi-Fi. Now, picture this. 3 generations deep into life among the stars, a child floats near a solar panel array and asks a question that could implode Thanksgiving dinner back on Earth. Why did we ever live on a planet? It's not a rebellious question. It's genuine curiosity, born from a life where toilets don't flush but vaporize, and where a walk outside involves a vacuum seal, oxygen tank, and the very real risk of being yeeted into infinity by a careless door malfunction. To them, Earth is not just history, it's inefficient, wet, loud, bug-infested. Their version of camping is a pressurized pod near an asteroid field, not a forest with mosquitoes and suspiciously large raccoons. But for the historians, and yes, even in the void, humanity maintains a proud tradition of underpaid archivists. The question is gold. It sparks a movement among the academic elite to reframe Earth not just as origin, but as a strange, volatile experiment in planetary confinement. Pre-cosmic adolescence, they call it. A phase we all went through, like bad haircuts or believing money would bring happiness. Of course, this doesn't sit well with the Earth revivalists. A loud, passionate sect that insists returning to Earth full-time is not just a noble mission, but a moral one. They argue that only Earth can teach true humanity. The beauty of seasonal allergies, the chaos of unexpected weather, and the simple joy of walking barefoot without worrying about hull breaches. Naturally, these debates make their way into politics. A heated summit in orbit ends with one delegate dramatically tossing a houseplant at another, shouting, "This is real life," before storming off to their cryo shuttle. Space Twitter explodes. Hashtags like hashtag Team Gravity and hashtag Born to Float trend for months. There's even a viral dance called the oxygen shuffle that involves mimicking airlock malfunctions while lip-syncing philosophical quotes from Carl Sagan. Meanwhile, technological advancements march on. Having conquered basic survival in orbit, humanity begins engineering upgrades to the human body itself. Not in the creepy Terminator meets bodybuilder way, but in subtle, practical enhancements. Adjustable blood viscosity for fluctuating pressures. Light-sensitive eyes adapted to starlight. Bones with microstructural reinforcements that chirp politely when you're overexerting. Please stop lifting that satellite. You are not impressing anyone. And for those who really want to embrace space living, there's neural software that translates orbital math into music. Engineers now troubleshoot thermal discrepancies by humming in harmony. Mechanics tap-tap rhythms to calibrate tools. Entire cities hum with soft symphonies of maintenance. The universe becomes less of a void and more of a vibing lounge. Of course, with biological upgrades come questions of identity. If you've replaced your bones, edited your lungs, and installed retinal overlays that allow you to see cosmic radiation as color gradients, are you still human? Or have you become something adjacent? A new movement arises, the Homo stellaris. Not as a species, but as a cultural identity. They believe humanity isn't defined by Earth birth or carbon composition, but by adaptability, by consciousness, by the stubborn refusal to quit, even when floating upside down in a broken habitat filled with algae because the oxygen farm got hacked by protesters. The Homo stellaris folks throw incredible parties, by the way. Gravity-optional raves with synchronized bioluminescent tattoos and space whale vocal remixes. Invitations are encoded in pulse rhythms only detectable by eardrums tuned for vacuum resonance. If that sounds pretentious, it is. But so were Renaissance salons, and at least this crowd serves decent snacks in pouch format. Meanwhile, Earth continues to quietly rebuild itself. Forests spread, oceans detox, cities are re-inhabited, not by necessity, but by choice. Artists and old souls migrate back to paint with dirt, sculpt with clay, and complain about actual weather. They see Earth as a spiritual retreat, a planet-sized spa where people rediscover gravity's gentle tyranny. There's even a trend in urban design called regravitization therapy, where spacers vacation in earthbound villas to reconnect with fatigue, joint pain, and the peculiar pleasure of not drifting during sleep. After one too many nights waking up tangled in a zero-G hammock with someone else's foot in your face, the idea of a bed that stays put becomes strangely luxurious. And here's where it gets interesting. After decades, maybe centuries, of divergence, humanity does not fracture. It harmonizes. Earthlings and spacers form a shared identity not in opposition, but in orbit. Their cultures become complementary. Earth becomes the cradle of rest, the muse of memory. Space becomes the frontier of ambition, the canvas of evolution. There are still conflicts. There are still egos, scandals, policy disasters, and the occasional rogue AI who insists that toasters deserve voting rights. But underneath it all, there's a growing awareness that the biggest mistake humans could make, again, is believing they have arrived at the final version of themselves. Evolution doesn't stop because we've figured out how to metabolize algae smoothies and generate artificial sunlight with disco ball satellites. It doesn't pause because we built the perfect vacuum toilet. It keeps going. Faster, stranger, hopefully wiser. So by the time a group of teenagers hack their school's learning system to simulate entire planetary ecosystems just for fun and get suspended for creating a sentient tulip that refuses to stop quoting Shakespeare, you begin to see the picture. Humans haven't just evolved to live in space. They've evolved to become space. To wear it like a suit, to speak in orbits and dreams, to understand that distance is not absence, but opportunity. And perhaps, just perhaps, the greatest sign of this evolution is not our tech or our habitats or even our biology, but our stories. Our unshakable instinct to gather, listen, and wonder aloud. What if? Of course, no grand human narrative would be complete without a bit of absurdity, because no matter how advanced we become, there's always that one person trying to 3D print a pizza with pineapple and zero gravity and spark a philosophical war. Let's not forget, the evolutionary journey into space wasn't a one-way ticket to perfection. It was a bumpy ride full of questionable decisions, accidental genius, and an endless supply of duct tape. Humanity didn't gracefully glide into the stars. It stumbled, panicked, duct-taped its helmet, and then accidentally discovered a more efficient oxygen filtration system while trying to unclog a protein shake dispenser. Some of the most pivotal advancements came not from think tanks or government projects, but from tinkerers, loners, and disgruntled engineers tired of bad software updates. One memorable incident involved a janitor-turned-coder who accidentally rerouted a habitat's plumbing system to play jazz whenever someone flushed. It was supposed to be a disaster. It became a design standard. Why? Because in deep space, humor is survival. And that's the twist. Space didn't just demand new lungs or stronger bones. It demanded a new sense of humor. You can't live in a floating metal can for years with the same 5 people and not develop an appreciation for the bizarre. Dark humor, dry wit, cosmic slapstick, it all became essential currency. Laughter was the pressure valve for sanity. In this brave, floating society, comedians were cultural architects. They weren't just entertainers. They were diplomats, philosophers, and emergency morale officers. Entire settlements formed comedy councils, rotating nightly performers as a way to maintain unity. Some say laughter bonded people more than oxygen. Of course, evolution didn't stop at the biological. Our concepts of identity, love, even time had to stretch and warp. Imagine falling in love with someone on Europa while you're stationed near Saturn. Your messages arrive days apart, and your romantic rhythm is literally light years off. But love adapts. People invented new rituals, orbital poetry, synchronized thought recordings, even shared dreamscapes engineered in sleep pods. Marriage vows were rewritten to account for time dilation. I promise to love you in sickness, in health, and across a 4.3 light-year delay became standard. There were legal disputes over emotional copyrights, arguments about whether 2 AI-generated avatars holding hands counted as cheating, and one infamous case where someone divorced their clone for being too emotionally distant. And yet, despite the eccentricities, humans kept weaving their tangled web of messy, beautiful relationships, flawed, irrational, and impossibly enduring. Meanwhile, art evolved into something almost unrecognizable. With gravity optional and perspective limitless, the very notion of canvas exploded. Artists sculpted with light, danced through vacuum-tuned thruster bursts, and composed music from asteroid vibrations. One piece featured a fleet of synchronized drones painting streaks of ionized gas across a nebula. Critics called it derivative, which only confirmed that art was still alive and well. Even religion didn't vanish. It mutated. Some sects believed stars were conscious beings. Others worshipped entropy. A few highly popular beliefs centered around a messiah returning as a space whale. One denomination's sacred text was entirely encoded in a pulsar rhythm, only readable through gravitational wave interpretation. It was dense, literally. But what truly defined the post-Earth human wasn't their tech or their rituals. It was their relationship with scale. Back on Earth, a long walk was a few miles. In orbit, a long walk might involve plotting a 3-month trajectory and negotiating with a Martian transit authority who insists your passport expired during cryosleep. Distance became both trivial and sacred. A millisecond of lag felt eternal. A year-long journey felt like a blink. And then there was the growing realization that we were not alone. Or rather, that we didn't need aliens to feel surrounded by mystery. Space itself became the other. Its vastness, its silence, its cold indifference. These were no longer obstacles to fear, but companions to understand. The void was not empty. It was waiting. Children born in space didn't just adapt. They transformed. Their bodies acclimated. Their minds expanded. Their imaginations had no terrestrial reference points. A child on Earth might draw a house and a tree. A child in orbit might draw a dream and a gravitational well. Their nightmares weren't of monsters in the closet, but of losing contact, of drifting too far, of silence unbroken. Yet they were also bolder, more experimental, less anchored to the assumptions of ground-bound societies. They questioned everything: ownership, work, gender, memory. When one child asked why adults still needed money, economists across 3 moons spiraled into existential crises. Education had to evolve too. History was taught with caveats. Back then, People used to walk. Yes, with legs, on solid ground all day. I know it sounds weird, but stay with me. Physical education became about reaction time in artificial gravity fields. Literature classes analyzed memes transmitted from rogue satellites as reflections of collective consciousness. Gymnastics was basically mandatory survival training. And slowly, over generations, Earth became the background hum of human memory. Revered, romanticized, rarely visited. Its gravity, once taken for granted, became a novelty, something people trained for like elite athletes before daring to land. Tourists cried at sunsets, swore the air tasted sweeter, and then raced back to orbit complaining about insects and humidity. Even language evolved. Words like down and up lost meaning. Home became emotional, not geographical. New dialects formed, spoken in frequencies optimized for helmet comms. Poetry emerged that couldn't be read, only felt through haptic suits. Communication became layered, multimodal, absurdly beautiful. And the final, perhaps most poetic twist? The farther humans traveled from Earth, the more they understood it. Not just as a rock hurtling through space, but as an idea, a story, a place where mud and stars met, where creatures once crawled out of oceans and dared to dream of the sky, and then kept going. We stopped being of Earth, but we never stopped being from it. Despite having scattered across solar systems, humanity began constructing a mythos around Earth, not as a current home, but as an ancestral legend. The blue planet became our Atlantis, a semi-mythical cradle whispered about on lullaby frequencies. Kids on Neptune colonies reenacted walking on grass by rolling over airfoam fields while old-timers argued on forums about whether pizza on Earth really had that magical taste or if nostalgia had gone rogue. History turned hazy. Was Earth a utopia? A prison? A classroom? It depended on who you asked and how many revolutions their colony made around its local star. Museums stored Earth relics, a spoon, a shoe, a plastic bag, with reverence usually reserved for holy artifacts. A toothbrush once owned by someone's grandmother became the centerpiece of a million-viewed virtual pilgrimage. Meanwhile, the real challenge loomed larger. Not how to survive space, but how to navigate our own growing power. Humans, now evolved into an interplanetary species, had capabilities that would make old deities blush. Terraforming had become less science fiction and more mundane meeting. We could warm a moon, seed it with microbes, and have grass by the fiscal quarter's end. But with power came ethical vertigo. If we could reshape entire worlds, did we have the right? One Martian colony famously voted to keep their sky perpetually red, refusing to adopt the oxygen-rich blue hue offered by Earth traditionalists. They claimed it was cultural erasure. Oxygen colonialism, they called it. Wars didn't vanish either. They just changed flavor. Not for oil or borders, but for resources like raw data, consciousness bandwidth, or emotional stability algorithms. Entire factions fought not over territory, but over narrative control, what counted as history, whose memories were real, and which AI could tell bedtime stories without subliminal product placement. The social hierarchies morphed too. On Earth, status was money, fame, power. In space, it became weird. The most influential individual in the Andromeda Relay Circuit was a 9-year-old who trained a jellyfish-like AI to compose lullabies that cured insomnia. Another popular figure was a sentient mushroom network that offered free therapy to passing spacecraft in exchange for weird gossip. Humans didn't just evolve physically, they evolved metaphorically. The idea of the self unraveled. Minds could be backed up, split, sent across galaxies in data packets. One enterprising explorer decided to clone his consciousness and send a version of himself to every major exoplanet. Years later, those versions refused to merge back, claiming individuality. Now there are 34 legally recognized Jeffs roaming the stars, each with distinct hobbies and increasingly petty grudges against each other. Romance followed suit. People fell in love across distances that once seemed impossible. Someone might date a person physically orbiting Saturn while mentally co-inhabiting a dream space built by a third partner based near Pluto. Long-distance love became a literal genre, with titles like Whispers Through Gamma Rays and I Kissed Your Avatar Under a Digital Moon. Still, loneliness persisted. Even surrounded by stars, the human need for connection remained as stubborn as ever, which is why the most profitable service in the galaxy wasn't energy, water, or data, but conversation. Real, unscripted, unpredictable human chat. Not AI simulations. Not auto-generated empathy. Just two flawed minds talking, arguing, laughing, occasionally crying. Preferably with glitchy background music and bad microphone quality, for authenticity. With Earth faded into legend, space became our canvas, our experiment, our mirror. And yet, the more we expanded, the more we re-encountered our old dilemmas. Jealousy, curiosity, arrogance, kindness. We didn't shed humanity when we left the planet. We amplified it, turned up the volume on everything. Our beauty, our brutality, our genius, our idiocy. Consider the incident with the solar whale. Yes, a solar whale, engineered by a team of eco-bio artists who thought, wouldn't it be lovely to fill space with singing creatures the size of cities? It was lovely, until someone taught one of them sarcasm. The whale began mocking passing ships. Loudly. It disrupted navigational sensors, started prank-calling asteroid miners, and once hacked a religious transmission to insert fart jokes. The public was divided. Some hailed it as performance art. Others demanded galactic cancellation. One colony passed legislation requiring all genetically engineered cosmic fauna to pass a maturity exam. The whale refused, citing freedom of expression, and is now considered the galaxy's first stand-up comedian to tour the Oort cloud. In the midst of all this absurdity, the question began to shift. It was no longer just, what if humans evolve to live in space? It became, what do we become when there are no limits left? When gravity, oxygen, distance, and even mortality become negotiable, what anchors us? Many answers emerged. Some found meaning in building habitats, families, philosophies. Others in exploring the furthest systems. And some chose to return. Yes, return. Not to Earth, necessarily, but to simplicity. To the intimate, the unshared, the slow. They created quiet zones. Places where data wasn't constantly pinging. Where faces weren't filtered through 12 layers of preference algorithms. Places where food was grown, not printed. Where weather was felt, not simulated. Where silence wasn't awkward, it was sacred. These people weren't Luddites. They were connoisseurs of meaning. In a world where everything could be modified, they chose not to. They preserved chaos, imperfection, mystery. Ironically, they became the most studied group in human civilization. Sociologists floated by in academic pods. Documentarians camouflaged themselves in asteroid dust to get candid footage. AI tried to emulate their speech patterns and failed miserably. The quiet folk became the reluctant celebrities of a world that had moved beyond fame. All of this was possible because of one grand transformation. We adapted. Not just biologically, but philosophically. Evolution, we realized, wasn't about perfection. It was about resilience. About storytelling. About adapting not to the environment, but to our own ability to change it. We didn't become gods. We became better humans. Or at least, we got weirder. And in the void between stars, that was enough. As centuries ticked on in the slow heartbeat of the cosmos, something astonishing happened. Boredom. Yes, universal, transcendent, deeply philosophical boredom. When every corner of existence could be explored, every material created, every question answered by a sentient toaster with a PhD in astrophysics. What was left to do? It turns out, humans, no matter how evolved, are still prone to existential ennui. Entire civilizations went retro. Some started pretending it was the 21st century again. They rebuilt shopping malls, reintroduced traffic, and revived TikTok, though this time the algorithm only served you videos of sentient plants trying stand-up comedy. Others went even further back. Victorian colonies sprouted across Jupiter's moons, complete with corsets, tea rituals, and monocled AI butlers who mostly judged you. In the Alpha Lyrae belt, a movement emerged called Real Earth Theater. Actors would reenact the most mundane events from human history, waiting in DMV lines, enduring bad blind dates, even listening to voicemail recordings. People wept. They paid fortunes to watch a man fail to assemble IKEA furniture for 40 minutes. Why? Because it felt real. It felt human. Meanwhile, the galaxy's infrastructure flourished. Zero-gravity schools produced poets who wrote in gravitational pulses instead of words. There were architecture duels on Saturn's rings. Imagine building a cathedral out of sound and stardust just to win a bet. Our cities floated, danced, shimmered across orbits in harmony with cosmic music composed by beings made entirely of thought. Yet amid all this innovation, fear crept back. The fear of losing touch, not with Earth, not even with bodies, but with essence. Who are we when nothing limits us? For all our advancements, one thing remained infuriatingly unsolvable: loneliness. You could beam your consciousness into a crystal garden orbiting Proxima Centauri, but you couldn't beam away heartbreak. No matter how advanced the tech, some problems required other people, or at least a dog. So humans began engineering emotional companions. Some were exquisite. Imagine a floating, humming entity that adapts to your moods and tells you bedtime stories in your childhood language. Others less so. There was the infamous fad of emotionally codependent drones, tiny flying robots that followed you everywhere, crying whenever you left the room. They were recalled after a swarm of them staged a cuddle strike on Mars. New philosophical schools emerged. One group, the Cosmic Clowns, argued that the meaning of life was simply absurdity. They launched pies at politicians, who were mostly holograms by then, and declared tax evasion a spiritual practice. Another faction, the Void Whisperers, believed we should surrender to entropy and do nothing, claiming true wisdom was achieved only by resisting every impulse to engage with the universe. Conflict didn't vanish. It just got stranger. On the edge of the Milky Way, two factions waged a silent war over punctuation. Yes, punctuation. One side insisted commas were obsolete in neural text transmission. The other viewed that as a cultural erasure. Skirmishes broke out in comment threads. The apostrophe accord of 4127 was signed reluctantly, and grudging peace ensued. And then there was the issue of identity. When humans no longer lived in flesh alone, when minds could be multiplied, merged, or altered with software patches, what did it mean to be you? A philosopher once asked, if I back up my consciousness nightly and reset every morning to an optimized emotional version of myself, am I still me? Or just a highly curated illusion? This inspired a reality series, Who Wants to Be the Original? Contestants competed to prove they were the most authentic copy of themselves. Season 5 ended in a stalemate when all versions voted for each other in a tragic show of mutual self-respect. But there was progress, not always in the traditional sense, more like an elegant spiral. Civilizations started revisiting old questions with newer tools. One such project involved mapping every emotion known to humanity across time. The result? A digital library where you could walk through a corridor of grief, taste nostalgia, or float inside a bubble made of generational pride. Art flourished, and not the kind that hangs on walls. The kind that wraps around asteroids or weaves through the tails of comets. Music made of magnetic fields. Theater performed inside collapsing stars. Poetry etched in light across the void, readable only when two ships align just right. Earth became a shrine, not for worship, but for reverence. No one lived there anymore. It was unstable, unpredictable, beautiful. A reminder of what we once were. A few daring souls made pilgrimages, braving unstable gravity and ancient toxins, just to feel wind again. To touch soil that hadn't been printed or sterilized. One man famously said, I saw a worm, a real one, and I cried. By this point, humanity had spread far beyond the stars we once knew. There were whisperings of the beyond, regions of space not mapped, not colonized, not explained. And yet, humanity approached it not with conquest, but curiosity. Because after all we had built, destroyed, rebuilt, uploaded, and reinvented, we had learned the most valuable lesson of all. Not everything has to be controlled. Not every mystery must be solved. Some things are meant to be stared at in awe, with a dumb grin and a snack in hand. So we floated there, at the edge of what we knew, staring into the silence, laughing quietly, remembering Earth and how far we'd come. Somewhere between the nebulas of imagination and the orbits of absurdity, we discovered what it meant to be human without Earth beneath our feet. It wasn't just the evolution of bones or lungs or even brains. It was the evolution of longing. We had traded seasons for supernovae, trees for titanium, and sunsets for starlight. And yet, we still wrote songs about rain, poems about campfires. We still whispered stories of loss, of joy, of that one time your great-grandmother tried to microwave a spoon and took down half the power grid. The past, messy, smelly, and gravity-bound, wasn't forgotten. It became sacred. In space, humans didn't just adapt. We edited ourselves, rewrote instincts, uploaded preferences. Some shed all emotions for the cold perfection of logic. Others downloaded libraries of feelings they'd never earned. The result? A society where someone could genuinely sob over a breakup they never had, while debating politics with a 12-dimensional octopus that identified as mostly vibes. But the pinnacle of this evolution wasn't in technology. It was in choice. For the first time, humanity could be anything. And instead of becoming gods, we chose to stay weird. We made clubs for people who only wanted to experience 1990s sitcoms in 4D. We built underwater opera houses on Europa where the music could only be heard through your bones. We revived extinct languages just to argue about the best type of cosmic cheese. And through it all, we remained gloriously inconsistent. Because even in a galaxy-spanning civilization, someone still burns toast. Someone still forgets birthdays. Someone still cries at reruns of that dog movie. The future wasn't clean or efficient. It was human, in all its messy, inconvenient, hilarious glory. And perhaps that's the point. Maybe evolving to live in space didn't mean leaving Earth behind. It meant carrying it with us. In every bad joke, every awkward first date in zero gravity, every time someone drew a heart on a window pane fogged by recycled oxygen, we brought our planet's soul to the stars, not just its science. So here we are, floating in an endless ocean of possibilities. Not gods, not machines, just people, space people. And now, before I let you drift off into your own orbit, let's keep this weird, wonderful conversation alive. If this episode made you laugh, made you think, or made you picture your grandma doing somersaults in a Mars gravity gym, then do something very human. Like this podcast, leave a comment telling us what kind of space creature you'd evolve into. And subscribe to What If Horizons, where we explore the futures that never happened, but always should have. Until next time, keep wondering, keep laughing, and remember, no matter how far we travel, we're still just stardust with opinions. Over and out.